and now I can't forgive myself. Hey guys, I'm Jess, and I'm 26 years old. Honestly, I never thought I'd be sitting here writing something like this. It's weird, thinking back on my life now and trying to make sense of all the crap that's happened. It feels like someone else's story, not mine. But here we are. So, yeah, my life is a total mess right now, and I kind of feel like I deserve it. But also, a lot of it is just stuff that happened, you know? My parents, Rick and Sarah, were like the perfect couple, or at least that's how it looked. They met super young when they were 16, high school sweethearts and all that. They had me when my mom was 19 and my dad was 20. Total unplanned pregnancy, obviously. I've heard them joke about it a bunch of times, like how they had no idea what they were doing but figured it out. I guess that's what most people do, right? My dad? Man, he was everything you'd want in a dad, or so I thought back then. He cooked, cleaned, worked like a machine, and still had time to hang out with me and my mom. He basically worshipped the ground she walked on. I swear I never heard him say a bad word about her. They never even fought in front of me, at least not when I was younger. He'd do stuff like make her coffee every morning, and every single time, he'd say it was because she deserved the world. That was my dad. And my mom? She was cool. She was the fun one. Always there for me. Always helping me out with school and life. My dad was the one who worked more, so I naturally spent more time with my mom. It wasn't anything deep or like weird favoritism, just the way things were. My mom's job was basically keeping everything running at home. I think that's why it hit so hard later, because I always saw her as this strong person who could handle everything. But yeah, my dad always wanted more kids. He'd joke about having a big family, but my mom, she shut that down real quick. I never really understood why, though. Anytime the topic came up, she'd just kind of change the subject or say, one's enough. At first, I thought it was just normal. Some people only want one kid. But looking back, maybe there was more to it. Things started to change when I was about 16. My dad had a freak accident at work. He's in construction, so accidents happen, but this one was bad, like real bad. He was bedridden for months. 7 months, actually. We never had to worry about money, though. I guess he had good insurance or something, because we still lived in the same house, and I still went to my private school, which I now realize cost a lot more than I ever knew. But the accident, man, it did something to my parents. My mom had to take over everything. She got a job, started running the house, all while taking care of my dad. I helped out where I could, like doing chores and stuff, but I was just a kid. I didn't really get what was going on. I remember her looking so tired all the time. The fun, laid-back mom I knew started fading, and in her place was someone who looked like they were just barely keeping it together. I didn't get it then, but it was like something was brewing, you know? My dad, being stuck in bed, started getting, how do I put this, frustrated. I'd catch him snapping at my mom for little things, stuff he never would have before, like he'd get mad if the house was too loud or if dinner was late. I think he felt useless being stuck in bed while my mom was out working, and basically doing everything he used to do. It must have messed with his head. But me? I still thought my parents were solid. Sure, they had these little moments, but nothing that seemed like it would break them apart. Then, after a few months of my dad being bedridden, things started getting weird with my mom. She'd come home late from work, sometimes way after dark, and she was always on her phone, texting like crazy. I remember thinking it was strange, but figured it was just work stuff. I mean, she was managing everything. House, bills, work, my dad's health. Who wouldn't be stressed? But one night, everything changed. It was probably around midnight, and I was just in my room, lying in bed, when my mom knocked on the door. She came in, and she looked different. Like, really off. Her eyes were all red, and she looked like she'd been crying for hours. She sat down on my bed, and for a minute, she didn't say anything. Just sat there, staring at her hands. Then she started crying again. Not like little tears, full-on sobbing. I didn't know what to do. I just kind of froze. Finally, she says, "I'm seeing someone else." I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where everything just stops, but that's what it felt like. I didn't even process it at first. She kept talking, telling me about some guy she met at work. His name was Luke. He was 26. 26. He was just a couple years older than me. I didn't know what to say. My mom wasn't even done talking, but my brain was already spinning. She told me she wasn't attracted to my dad anymore, that being stuck in this situation with him bedridden was too much. And then she did the thing that made it all worse. She showed me her text messages with Luke. She didn't just tell me, she showed me. I didn't want to see that. She even started talking about how she felt alive again because of him. I didn't understand what she wanted from me. I was her daughter, and suddenly she's asking me to be some kind of confidant or whatever. It was all so messed up. Then, she says she needs my help. She needs me to keep quiet, to cover for her so my dad wouldn't suspect anything. I know it sounds stupid now, but at the time I agreed. I was 16. I didn't know any better, and I wanted to help my mom. I wasn't thinking about the long-term damage. I was just thinking about how I didn't want her to cry anymore. From that night on, things got worse. My mom started coming home later and later. She and Luke would go out together, and I would tell my dad she was working late. He never seemed to question it. He trusted her, even though she barely spent time with him anymore. It all started to feel so wrong, but I was in too deep. I couldn't stop it. I thought I was doing the right thing by helping my mom, but every time I lied to my dad, it felt like a little piece of me was breaking. All right, so after my mom's confession, I thought things couldn't get any worse. I mean, I was already lying to my dad, covering for her, and pretending like everything was normal. But then, out of nowhere, she drops another bomb on me. It was a random Saturday afternoon. I remember it so clearly because I was sitting in the kitchen, just minding my own business, when my mom walks in and says, "We need to talk." Now, normally when someone says that, you kind of prepare yourself, right? Like, you expect something heavy. But after everything that had already happened, I honestly didn't think there was anything else she could say that would shock me. I was wrong. So wrong. She sits me down and just goes, "I'm pregnant." I swear, it felt like someone hit me in the chest with a brick. Pregnant? I couldn't even process it at first. I remember just staring at her, like she'd said something in a language I didn't understand. My brain was trying to catch up, but it just wasn't clicking. Pregnant. My mom. With Luke's baby. What? Was all I could manage. Real smooth, right? She nods, looking all serious, like this was some normal conversation to be having. I found out a few days ago. And now she's just telling me? Like I'm supposed to do something about it? I didn't even know what to say. I felt my throat tighten up, like I was gonna throw up or something. My mom, who was still technically married to my dad, was pregnant with another man's baby. And that man was some 26-year-old creep from her work. Does dad know? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. There was no way he knew. My dad wasn't an idiot, but he was completely oblivious to what was happening right under his nose. She shook her head. No, not yet. I haven't told him. I don't know how. I sat there feeling this weird mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. My dad was working his ass off to get back on his feet after being stuck in bed for months, and my mom was out here living a double life. And now this? What was I even supposed to do with this information? Then, because clearly I hadn't been punched in the gut enough, she says, "I want you to meet him." Wait, what? Luke, I want you to meet him properly. He wants to talk to you. Nope. No, absolutely not. I didn't want to meet this guy. I didn't want to see his face, hear his voice, or even know he existed. But my mom was sitting there, looking at me like this was totally reasonable. Like it was just something I had to do because she said so. I didn't argue with her, though. I think I was too stunned to say anything, honestly. I just nodded, even though everything inside me was screaming, "This is a bad idea." A few days later, my mom arranged for us to meet up with Luke. She told my dad we were going to run errands or something. Another lie on top of all the others. We ended up at this restaurant, someplace way too fancy for someone like Luke. It felt wrong from the second I walked in. The lighting was dim, the music was soft, and the whole vibe was just off. I sat across from my mom, and Luke sat next to her, holding her hand like they were this happy couple. It made my skin crawl. The whole time, I kept thinking about my dad, stuck at home, probably wondering why his wife and daughter were gone for so long. Luke tried to make small talk at first, asking me questions about school and stuff, but I barely answered. I couldn't stop staring at him, wondering what the hell my mom saw in this guy. He was nothing like my dad. He had this greasy hair, shaggy clothes, and he smelled like he hadn't showered in days. And this was the guy she threw her life away for? Then, halfway through the dinner, they dropped the real reason they wanted to meet me. My mom, with zero hesitation, says, "We're keeping the baby." I almost choked on my drink. Keeping the baby? I hadn't even wrapped my head around the fact that she was pregnant, and now they were telling me this was happening for real? That my mom was going to have a baby with this guy? I don't remember what I said. Honestly, my brain kind of short-circuited at that point. All I remember was Luke grinning like an idiot and my mom looking at me, waiting for my approval or something. Like, what did they expect me to say? Congrats? Can't wait to have a half-sibling from this dumpster fire of a relationship? I think I just muttered something like, "Okay, cool," because I couldn't think of anything else. What was I supposed to do? Yell at them? Walk out? It felt like I was stuck in some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. After that dinner, things got even worse at home. My mom was more distant from my dad than ever, barely spending any time with him. She'd always be working late or running errands, which was code for spending time with Luke. And I kept my mouth shut the whole time because I didn't want to make things worse. I hated it, but I didn't know what else to do. But my dad, he wasn't stupid. He could tell something was up. One night, I overheard him on the phone with a friend talking about how Sarah wasn't the same anymore, how she seemed distant and distracted all the time. He said he was worried, but that he loved her and wanted to make things work. That hit me hard. My dad was still holding on, still trying to fix everything, while my mom had already checked out and was building a new life with someone else. It all came crashing down when my mom finally told my dad about the baby. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard the aftermath. They were yelling, like really yelling, for the first time in my life. My dad's voice was raw, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. My mom kept saying she was sorry, that she didn't mean for it to happen this way, but my dad wasn't having it. He kept shouting about how he had trusted her, how he had worked so hard to get better for her, and she had betrayed him. I stayed in my room, listening, feeling like my whole world was crumbling. My dad's voice eventually broke, and then there was silence. After what felt like hours, I heard him leave. The front door slammed, and I knew in that moment nothing would ever be the same again. Update 1. So after that huge fight between my parents, things went from bad to worse. My dad didn't come home that night. I think he stayed at a friend's place or maybe a hotel. Either way, he was gone. My mom? She was a wreck, like completely falling apart. I've never seen her like that before. She cried all night and I didn't know what to do. I wasn't about to go comfort her after everything she'd done, but at the same time, she was still my mom, and seeing her like that hit hard. I just stayed in my room, trying to block it all out. The next day, my dad came back, but it wasn't to stay. He walked into the house with this cold, determined look, like he had made up his mind about something. He didn't even look at my mom when he came in, just went straight to their bedroom and started packing. I could hear him throwing things into a suitcase from the hallway. My mom was standing there in the kitchen, just staring at him, not saying a word. Finally, she broke down and tried to stop him. She kept saying stuff like, "Rick, please, we can work this out," and "I made a mistake, but we can fix it." But my dad wasn't listening. He didn't even stop packing. He just kept going, like she wasn't even there. And then, right before he left, he dropped the bomb that changed everything. He turned to her, looked her dead in the eyes, and said, "I know about the baby. I know it's not mine." The silence after that was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My mom froze. She looked like someone had punched her in the gut, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I guess she thought she could keep hiding it, that he'd never figure it out. But he knew. He had known for a while. "I want a divorce," he said, as calm as ever. "I'm done." My mom collapsed right there in the kitchen, sobbing. It was like watching someone's whole world crumble in front of them, and I just stood there feeling helpless. I wanted to scream at her for what she did, for messing everything up, but I couldn't. I was stuck between feeling sorry for her and being angry at her at the same time. It was such a messed up situation. My dad walked out the door with his suitcase, and just like that, he was gone. My mom didn't even try to stop him after that. She just stayed on the floor, crying. I had no idea what to do. I mean, what do you even do in that situation? There was no guidebook for this. For the next few days, things were tense. My dad didn't come back. I think he stayed at his brother's place across town. Meanwhile, my mom tried to act like everything was fine. She went to work, did chores, pretended like nothing had changed, but I knew better. I could see it. She was falling apart on the inside. Every time I looked at her, I could see the guilt eating away at her. And then came the papers. A week later, my dad sent over the divorce papers. It wasn't even a conversation at that point, just paperwork. My mom stared at them like they were some kind of foreign object. She didn't sign them right away. I think she was holding on to some hope that my dad would change his mind. But that wasn't going to happen. I remember one night she came into my room with the papers in her hand. She sat down on the edge of my bed, and for the first time since everything blew up, she looked defeated, like all the fight had gone out of her. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't want to lose him." I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to say? She had destroyed everything. I could see it in her eyes, though. She wanted me to say something comforting, like it was going to be okay or that she could fix things. But I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her anymore. "I think it's too late, Mom," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad's not coming back." She didn't say anything after that, just sat there, staring at the papers in her hands. It felt like we were both mourning something that was already dead. Our family, the way things used to be, it was all gone, and there was no way to bring it back. After that, things started moving fast. My mom finally signed the papers, and the divorce process started. It was messy, of course. My dad didn't want anything to do with my brother, the baby. He refused to sign the birth certificate when he was born. It was like he was erasing every trace of my mom from his life, including the baby she had with Luke. Speaking of Luke, he was around more and more. My mom was still seeing him, which just made everything worse. I couldn't stand the sight of him, but he was always there, acting like nothing was wrong. He even moved in after the divorce was finalized. Can you believe that? This guy who ruined everything for us was now living in our house. I tried talking to my mom about it once. I told her that it felt wrong, that it was too soon, but she just brushed me off. She said she was moving on, and that I needed to accept it. But I couldn't. I couldn't accept any of it. Around that time, I started pulling away from her. I couldn't stand to be in the same room as her or Luke. Every time I looked at them, I saw everything that was wrong. I saw my dad walking out, my mom's betrayal, and this new life that I didn't want to be a part of. One night, I heard my mom and Luke talking in the kitchen. They were laughing about something, like they didn't have a care in the world. It made me so angry. How could they just laugh like that? How could they act like everything was fine when they had destroyed our family? I don't know what came over me, but I snapped. I stormed into the kitchen, and before I knew it, I was yelling. I was yelling at my mom, at Luke, at both of them. I let out everything I'd been holding in for months. I told them how much I hated what they'd done, how much I missed my dad, how I couldn't believe they were acting like everything was normal. My mom just stood there staring at me like she didn't recognize me. And Luke? He didn't say a word. He just sat there, watching me lose it. When I was done, my mom tried to calm me down. She kept saying, "Jess, it's okay. We'll get through this." But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear any of it. I walked out of the house that night and I didn't come back until the next morning. I just needed to be away from all of it, from them, from everything. And that's when I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change. Update 2. All right, so after that night where I blew up at my mom and Luke, things didn't magically get better. If anything, it got worse. I could feel the distance between me and my mom growing by the day. We barely talked unless it was necessary, and when we did, it was tense, like walking on eggshells. Luke kept hanging around the house, and every time I saw him, it made my blood boil. I couldn't get past the fact that he was part of the reason everything went downhill. But then something happened that really messed with me. It was one of those moments where you just can't ignore what's going on anymore, even if you want to. So, a couple of months after the divorce, my little brother, the baby, was born. I didn't think I'd feel anything when he came, but when my mom brought him home from the hospital, I couldn't help it. I felt this weird connection. He was just this tiny, innocent kid in all of this chaos, and suddenly it wasn't his fault. He didn't ask for any of this, right? He didn't choose to be born into this mess. The first few days after he came home, things were actually peaceful. My mom was tired, of course, but she seemed focused on the baby. Luke wasn't around as much during that time, probably because he didn't know what to do with a newborn. It was almost like a break from all the tension, but that didn't last long. A week later, I was home alone with the baby. My mom had gone to the store, and Luke, well, he was who knows where, probably doing whatever it is he does. I was sitting in the living room with my brother when my dad called. Now my dad had barely been in touch since the divorce. He'd sent me a couple of texts, asking how I was, but nothing deep. But this time he called, which was a big deal. I picked up, and there was this long pause on the other end before he spoke. "How are you doing, Jess?" His voice sounded different, like tired and kind of distant, but I could tell he was trying. I wasn't sure what to say. It felt awkward, talking to him after everything that had gone down. But I missed him more than I wanted to admit, so I just told him the truth. "I'm managing, I guess." He asked a few more questions about school, my friends, and then, out of nowhere, he asked, "How's your mom?" I didn't know how to respond to that. Like, what did he expect me to say? That she was doing great, living her best life with the guy she cheated on him with? I paused for a second, trying to figure out what to say, and then I just blurted out, "She had the baby." There was silence on the other end for what felt like forever. When my dad finally spoke again, his voice was flat. "I know, I heard." That's when it hit me. Of course, he knew. He wasn't some random guy in the picture. He was my dad. He probably heard through family or maybe even from my mom herself. It wasn't some secret. Do you want to see him? I don't know why I asked. Maybe I thought for a second that this could be a way to fix things, that maybe seeing the baby would soften everything that happened. No, he said quickly and firmly. That's not my son, Jess. I've made my peace with that. I didn't say anything after that. I couldn't. The finality of his words hit me hard. This baby, my brother, was a constant reminder to my dad of everything he lost, and there was nothing I could do to change that. We didn't talk much longer after that. My dad ended the call by telling me to take care of myself, and that was it. I hung up the phone, feeling more lost than I had before. Later that night, my mom came back from the store, and Luke showed up too. He was acting like everything was normal, like he hadn't destroyed my family. I tried to stay out of their way, but every time I looked at the baby, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head. That's not my son. It was the first time I really let myself feel angry at my mom, not just at Luke, but at her. She had done this. She had broken us. And now, I had to live in this mess she created. My dad had moved on, started over, but I was still stuck in the middle of it all. A few days later, something happened that really pushed me over the edge. I was in my room, trying to do homework or something, not that I could focus with everything going on, and I heard my mom and Luke talking in the living room. They didn't know I was listening, but they were being loud, so it was hard not to hear. Luke was complaining about something. Money, of course. He said he didn't want to keep paying for stuff and that my mom needed to figure it out. I don't know why, but that made me snap. This guy, who had waltzed into our lives and destroyed everything, was now complaining about money after everything he'd done? I stormed into the living room without thinking. Are you serious right now? You think you're paying for anything? You think you get to complain after what you did to this family? Luke looked at me like I had grown two heads, and my mom, she looked scared, like she didn't know how to handle the situation. But I wasn't backing down this time. I was done. You don't get to act like you're some victim here, I shouted. You destroyed everything. My dad's gone, and it's because of you. You think you can just replace him? You're not my dad, and you never will be. Luke stood up like he was about to say something, but my mom cut him off. She stepped between us and tried to calm me down, but I was shaking with anger. I'm done pretending like this is okay, I said, my voice shaking. I'm done lying for you, and I'm done watching you ruin everything. My mom looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't care anymore. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. I needed air, space, anything to get away from that mess. That night, I realized something. My dad might have moved on, but I was still holding on to the idea that things could go back to how they were. But they couldn't. My family was broken, and nothing was going to fix that. Not my mom, not Luke, and not me. Update 3. All right, so after everything that went down with my mom and Luke, I knew things weren't going to magically get better. But there was still this small, stupid part of me that thought maybe, just maybe, something could change. Like maybe my mom would wake up one day and realize how much of a mess she made. Maybe Luke would leave or my dad would come back into my life somehow. I don't know. I was grasping at straws, trying to find some kind of hope in a situation that felt hopeless. But reality has a way of slapping you in the face when you least expect it. So it was a few months after my blow-up with Luke. I was doing my best to stay out of their way, which meant spending most of my time either at school or at my friend's house. I just didn't want to be around the house anymore. It didn't feel like home. But I still had to go back sometimes, and every time I did, it felt like this dark cloud was hanging over everything. One day, I came home from school, and as soon as I walked in the door, I could tell something was off. The house was too quiet. Normally, I'd hear the baby crying or my mom talking to him, but this time there was nothing. Just silence. I walked through the house, calling out for my mom, but no answer. I finally found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table, staring at her phone. She looked pale, like she had seen a ghost or something. I was about to ask her what was wrong when she looked up at me, and I could see it in her eyes. Something bad had happened. What's going on? I asked, feeling my stomach twist in knots. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me her phone. On the screen was a message from Luke. It was short and to the point, but the meaning behind it hit me like a truck. I'm leaving. This isn't working out. Take care of the baby. I read the message over and over again, hoping I had somehow misunderstood it. But nope, it was exactly what it looked like. Luke had bailed. He had walked out on my mom and my brother without even saying it to her face. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after he had ruined our family, moved into our house, acted like he was part of our lives. He just up and left? Like it was nothing? I looked at my mom, expecting her to be angry or upset, but all she said was, "He's gone." That was it. No tears, no yelling, just those two words. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't surprised. She knew this was coming. Deep down, she had to have known that Luke wasn't sticking around forever. He was never going to be my dad, never going to be there for my brother. He was just another mistake in a long line of bad choices. I didn't know what to say. What do you even say in that situation? I just stood there staring at her, waiting for her to do something, anything. But she just sat there, like she had nothing left to give. For the next few days, everything felt off. My mom didn't really talk about what happened with Luke, and I didn't ask. It was like we were both avoiding the elephant in the room. She threw herself into taking care of my brother, but it was obvious she was struggling. And I didn't know where I fit into all of this anymore. Then one night my dad called again. It was late, and I was already in bed when my phone lit up with his name. I hesitated before answering, not really sure what to expect. But when I picked up, his voice was calm, softer than the last time we talked. "Jess, we need to talk." I felt my heart race. Something about the way he said it made me nervous. I sat up in bed, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. "What's up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, and then he said, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, your mom, and the divorce." I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. He went on to say how he had spent months trying to move on, trying to put everything behind him, but that he couldn't stop thinking about me. He said he regretted how things had ended between us, how he had shut me out, but that it was too painful to stay in contact after what had happened. "I miss you, Jess," he said, his voice breaking a little. "But I don't know how to be a part of your life when everything reminds me of what happened." I felt this lump in my throat, like I was going to cry, but I didn't. I couldn't. I had waited so long for him to say something like this, but now that he was, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let him back into my life, but another part of me was still so angry, angry at him for leaving, for not being there, for letting me deal with all of this on my own. "I miss you too," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to fix this either." We sat in silence for what felt like forever. Neither of us had the answers, and that was the hardest part. My dad wanted to be in my life again, but the damage had already been done, and I didn't know if things could ever go back to the way they were. After that call, I didn't sleep much. I just laid in bed, thinking about everything. My dad, my mom, Luke, the baby. My family was so broken, and I had no idea how to put the pieces back together. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in this mess. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. So I sat my mom down and told her I was moving out. I was 18 now, and it was time to get out of this house and figure out my own life. She didn't argue. She didn't even try to stop me. She just nodded and said, "I understand." A week later, I packed up my stuff and left. I found a small apartment nearby and started working more hours to pay the rent. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for me. I wasn't stuck in the middle of my parents' drama anymore. I was finally free. My relationship with my mom is still complicated. We talk sometimes, but it's not the same. As for my dad, we're working on it. It's not perfect, but at least we're talking again. And my brother? He's just a baby. He didn't ask for any of this. I visit him sometimes, and every time I do, I remind myself that he's innocent in all of this. One day, I'll tell him the truth about what happened. But for now, I just want him to have a chance at a better life than the one I had.